The congregational church I will be basing this video on today is Grace Redeemer Church, located in Glen Rock, New Jersey. Grace Redeemer Church is part of the Presbyterian Church in America. I would personally say that the church is racially diverse, seeing a lot of representation from the Asian community specifically. In their official About section on their website, Grace Redeemer Church calls itself a multi-ethnic church. However, this definitely does not reflect the full diversity of the surrounding region. First, let's take a look at the current demographic of Glen Rock, New Jersey. The racial demographic of Glen Rock, New Jersey is about 76% white, 15% Asian, 6% Hispanic, and 0.4% black. The socioeconomic status is very much middle to upper middle class, with a 2023 median household income being around $210,000. The poverty rate just at 1.71%. In 2023, the largest industries in terms of occupation for Glen Rock, New Jersey were educational services, professional scientific and technical services, and healthcare and social assistance. Bergen County, the town that Glen Rock is in, is made up of about 53% white, 18% Asian, 25% Hispanic, and 8% black. It is interesting as Patterson, a city about 15 minutes away from Glen Rock and in the Passaic County, has only around a 10% white population and about a 60 to 80% population of Hispanics and blacks. Patterson, New Jersey also has a higher poverty rate, around 23.6%, and a median household income almost 4 times as less as Glen Rock, around at $54,000. We can see that white and affluent populations tend to be concentrated in Glen Rock and similar suburban towns, while black and Latino populations are more concentrated in nearby urban areas. These groups are largely absent from Glen Rock not because of distance, but because of economic, social, and historical barriers. This leads to the question of, how did we get to this point? First, let's look at the history of Glen Rock, New Jersey. Glen Rock, New Jersey was originally owners to the Lenape. The Lenape were traditional Eastern Woodlands native people. According to one source, there is no evidence that the Lenape had permanent villages in what is now Glen Rock, but they were known to hunt in this area, and in fact, many arrowheads have been found there. What is a confirmed fact, though, is how Glen Rock got its name. There was a massive boulder in Glen Rock, New Jersey. It was known to the natives as Pamachapuka, meaning a large stone from the sky, that served as a trail marker. The first Europeans, many of whom were Dutch farmers, moved into this Bergen County area in the 1600s, expanding westward from New Netherland. By the mid-1700s, the majority of the Lenape had been pushed out of New Jersey, and the incoming Dutch farmers were impressed with the richness of the soil and settled there to raise their crops. The Lenape were not absorbed or assimilated, they were displaced. There was no famous removal events, and the way the Lenapes were removed was not a violent removal. Europeans just interpreted this land as unused or available, which justified settlement in their minds. Another area of history that we could look into to understand the racial demographics of Glen Rock today is the history of slavery. Bergen County would become the largest slaveholding county in New Jersey. This was primarily due to the fact that Dutch farmers would set up there and not only bring their crops, but bring their slaves as well to settle in the area. The legal structure of slavery in New Jersey was codified through a series of legislative acts that ensured the subjugation of enslaved people. In 1704, New Jersey passed an act prohibiting slaves from owning property or bearing arms, and in 1713, further statutes restricted their movement, assembly, and marriage rights. New Jersey's legislature was the last in the North to abolish slavery, passing a law in 1804 for its gradual emancipation. It was not until 1846 that New Jersey abolished slavery, but it qualified it by redefining former slaves as apprentices who were apprenticed for life to their masters. Ultimately, slavery did not truly end in the state until it was ended nationally in 1865 after the American Civil War and the 13th Amendment being added to the Constitution. However, racism was still present in many different ways after emancipation. Glen Rock, New Jersey had the possibility of being a sundown town, although it is unknown and unlikely that it was one. The Great Migration saw black families move up north, and that integration was not easy. There were definitely broader racial tensions and issues of discrimination that were reported in the region, just not in the form of large-scale violence. Oral and anecdotal accounts from residents in nearby suburbs sometimes describe racist attitudes and social exclusion. For example, efforts in some nearby towns in the mid-20th century to ban African Americans from using municipal facilities like pools in nearby communities. An article from the Ridgewood Herald in 1927 described a KKK gathering of over 300 members in Glen Rock. Secondary descriptions from local history indicate that the 1927 Klan gathering did include a cross lighting. The Klan marched or met in other towns in North Jersey, though. Cross burnings occurred in other suburbs such as Montclair, and the Klan was active in Bloomfield, Newark, Trenton, and elsewhere in the state in the early 20th century. Another form of racial oppression came in the form of redlining and housing discrimination. With the HOLC grading system, according to mapping inequality, the overall pattern in Bergen County included the percentages of this: 3% best, 27% still desirable, 52% definitely declining, and 10% hazardous. One area specifically in Glen Rock is labeled hazardous, and the only description of the area is the statistic that black people lived in that area. Also, with my research, it seems like most of the hazardous area were in correlation with proximity to the railroad. Because suburbs like Glen Rock were overwhelmingly white in the 1930s, they tended to be graded higher than more diverse or urban parts of the county. As we reflect on the history of Glen Rock, New Jersey, it can be easy to see how we got to where we are now. Paterson, New Jersey makes more sense when we look at the financial and housing discrimination. Most of Paterson was redlined, compared to the Bergen County and Glen Rock that was hardly redlined. It has a high correlation with the redlining and the poverty rates now between Glen Rock and Paterson, New Jersey. Learning the history is super important, as it helps us look at the mission and understand the ways racism still exists today, and why it still exists. Karen Johnson in Ordinary Heroes of Racial Justice says that history can help us see our context more clearly so we can better serve God faithfully in our generation. I appreciate Grace Redeemer Church's effort to be a multi-ethnic church. Understanding the history of Glen Rock and Bergen County as a whole makes Grace Redeemer's efforts even more impressive. Grace Redeemer could stick with being a primarily white congregation, and no one would think twice, especially with the racial demographic mentioned earlier. But their efforts to be a diverse, multi-ethnic church shows the efforts to integrate and break down the oppressive history of the past. Overall, learning about the history helps us better understand the present, and as Johnson said, can help us better faithfully serve God today within our congregations and ourselves.